share that link also.
Yeah, sorry, I missed that last part. You were gonna share something, you said?
Yeah, I'm going to share the issue that I was trying to resolve and I couldn't understand. I'm sharing the link, and please
Okay.
help me understand better what that issue is, because there was a problem in understanding that issue. Let me share the chat group.
Cool. And also to answer your previous questions, this is, I might have some more of these if I look. This is an example of a proposal from last year. This also happens to be related to Buildpack registry. But this is a good format to use for drafting the proposal. And I think we're all like, I in particular, but any of us are happy to like help guide you on that. Like the example I sent, like
it's
we worked on it
requiring
together.
access. So I'm sending you the
Okay,
request.
yeah, do that.
I have sent you the request, and this that I've sent the issue on the channel, on the Zoom Meet chat channel. So the issue, if we see, the issue is like it has to verify namespace owner action should accept a block list. So my question is this only, that what do we mean by block list or array of namespaces? Like there are one namespace is in Linux. I guess the namespace that here we are trying to figure out is different. That is something related to Buildpacks only.
Yeah, that namespace is a Buildpack concept. It's part like a component of the ID. Maybe I'll state this here and then I'll try to capture it in the issue, since those are good questions. But the namespace is part of like the specification for the Buildpack registry, and might actually go beyond that. And so we're trying to parse that out of the ID. It's like, you know, a component in the ID, and then compare it to a block list, which might include things like CNCF or Buildpacks or swear words or things like that. And then restrict people from creating those namespaces. So I'll try to capture some more of that detail in this issue, just so that it's, so you can refer back to it if you forget whatever.
Definitely.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. And thank you so much for sharing the doc proposal. I will definitely look once it is accessed. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and then I don't know if you're on the Slack or on the mailing list, but
I'm on the Slack, and I've introduced myself in the general channel. I've given. I'm sorry for the long introduction there. I totally I have explained what I have done till now. I was a previous year Google Summer of Code scholar as well. I contributed in RTMS project last year. I successfully built their continuous integration solution with Epix and other open source community. And right now I'm a Linux Foundation mentee with CNCF only. And right now I'm contributing to Kubernetes. So I'm contributing to Kubernetes working group policy report. So I'm creating their policy report custom resource definitions right now. So that is my experience. And now I am planning to contribute to this community as well. I started working on this block list issue. So I hope that with your today's information, I can work on the PR of that and the proposal as well, because the time is less. So I will share the first draft of the proposal by tomorrow itself to the community.
Well, certainly nice to meet you.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for hearing me. And I'm sorry if I've taken a lot of time of the community. I'm really sorry.
No, that's what this is
good.
for.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay, if we're all good there, how about we move on to the next item? Pack to support remote source fetcher and support the project metadata tag.
This was something I put in the last office hours, but we didn't get to it. So there's currently a label called IO Buildpacks project metadata, which is supposed to be filled with, like, if it's a Git repository, the commit SHA of the app directory or whatever, or if it's a tarball, I'm guessing the SHA for that tarball. But because Pack currently runs everything locally, I guess that's not set anywhere, or I guess it doesn't detect if it's a Git repository and set that label. Is that correct? No.
It could, in some cases, right? Like I feel like if your path to your after, if you find a .git in there, pack could be enhanced to set that data, and it probably would be nice.
Right? Yeah, the proposal here was like, I don't know if we want to introduce like, so the reason I bring this up is because some other platforms, let's say Kpack, allow you to specify a Git repository or a tarball, and they know exactly where your source code is coming from, so they can set this appropriately. With Pack, since it just runs on a local directory, does not have an appropriate way of knowing where the source is actually coming from. So the question was whether we want to add support for something like, apart from path, whether we want to support some remote fetching options, or is that out of scope for Pack? Like you can, instead of path, you can provide like git URL, and that's just a git URL, or like a URL that's just a URL to some tarball on S3 or whatever. And that would potentially resolve this. So like, even if it's a local path and you provide a git URL with the local directory, it still works. But that's, is there already an issue for it?
So there's a related issue, right, where really the ask was more that OCI specific label was generated with that information. And from there, like the discussion started around like certain things that we should already be doing. And I believe there's a separate issue that I failed to find right now, but there's an issue where even from Java binaries, right, we should be able to extract where the source is coming from based on some of the information that's available in the metadata within the jar contents. All that being said, I think it's like something we desire to do. It's just never reached, the top of whatever anybody's radar to get done. So that's one thing in regards to applying the source to the metadata label. The idea of fetching remote contents, I think has been something that we might have touched on in conversation at some point, but nothing that has ever been driven out completely. Personally, I don't think I would be opposed to it, but it would require some additional thought for authentication if need be, and what sort of protocols would be accepted, right? But that's, again, kind of like a bigger conversation.
Yeah, I guess that's why I was thinking it could be more of a plugin thing, where if you want to provide like a new kind of fetcher for a particular like URI type, you could just plug it in for like Git or like S3 directly instead of HTTP or something like that. I don't know if you want all of those things in Pack directly, or whether it should just be a plugin system that can accept like different remote fetchers that users can just plug in. I can't think of a nice way to design it immediately, but that's sort of what I was thinking, that this may be a nice way to enhance Pack with not just working on local directories, but also remote content.
I think the only statement I want to make is that there's a certain level of overhead and complexity to a plugin system. And unless we foresee like the need for this to really be something that we want to enable for other, sort of methods or formats of bringing in source code, I don't know that it would be worthwhile at this point in time. So I would say, creating like a proposal that embeds this into Pack would probably be the lowest hanging fruit to just resolve some of the questions, like I said, around protocols and authentication.
I would ask like how much value there is, especially if in the beginning we're mostly only supporting Git, because I feel like that'd be the case that everyone wants the first time. like compared to other things we could do in Pack, and the fact that you could just git clone and pass the path, like how much value does it add relative to other features?
If I remember correctly, when I was playing with S2I, it allows you to pass in a remote repository, and it was a really nice ease of use feature, right? Like it made my life happy, feel good because I didn't have to actually clone it, right? I didn't have to go through those manual processes. So I think it's beneficial in that sense, but I get where you're coming from.
Yeah, I think
Sounds to me like a nice to have.
Oh, single step. I think removing a single step like that can be huge, especially when it gets you down to like, there is no step. Like you're just putting the URL into an option. I wouldn't undervalue having that.
The other possible use case is that, like now, like if you have a pack container image, you could just like run that container image with a git URL, and now you have like a standalone way of building, I guess, images without now injecting like a git binary in that container image and then doing git clone and whatever. So I think it's useful, but yeah, like you could achieve this using like other methods. The main reason was like twofold. Either like I guess this whole issue has two parts. One is the remote source fetching thing, and the other is the setting of that label metadata. The latter like is actually difficult to achieve using a build pack, because if you're doing it in some subdirectory which does not have .git in it, it never gets mounted onto the workspace and you can never detect that. So it would have to be something at the platform level that actually sets a label like that. So the latter would still be useful, even if it's just like the local directory where it detects if it's working inside a Git subtree or like a subdirectory and sets that commit shell. That would still be useful.
Yeah, I think you speak to a very specific problem that even Pack itself might run into, right? Where you can run Pack from anywhere within your system and you're passing a path to execute, and that path might be a subdirectory inside of a Git repository. So I don't know that there's a very clear way of resolving that specifically. And I don't know if we're going to make, a hard attempt at doing so, to be honest. I know that the project TOML does have this metadata, so I think we're looking there first would be better than looking elsewhere. But again, that's another challenge where we think about the different precedents of where we want to look for this metadata to insert it into the label.
I would argue that if the path is a git dir, maybe you don't have to handle all the edge cases where it's a sub dir, right? Like then you could say, put your project TOML in the root dir and pass the path to that, which will then forward you down to a different path. But the reason I like, even if we're not great at handling all the edge cases on the first pass, is that not every project has a project TOML. In fact, lots of very simple ones don't. And it would still be nice to get this functionality.
Agreed. I guess what are the next steps for this? Because I think we've acknowledged that this label exists, right? We haven't really concretely thought of the implementation from Pack's perspective. And so I feel like we're missing that step somehow.
I guess there are two labels, right? There's our project metadata label, and then there are the OCI standard labels. And I think the place to start, since we already spec'd out our project label, is filling that in. And then if we're talking about the OCI label, there's two ways you could approach that. Like you could either flesh out our proposal to allow platforms to set arbitrary labels, and then platforms could just set that if they want to. Or we could be more opinionated and say, we're not going to fill out this. We're not just going to fill out this project metadata label. We're going to make opinions in the life cycle about when to set some of these standard labels. I think before we even get into that question, we should just fill out the label we already spec'd in the most common case, which is the path is a path to a git dir. I mean, to a directory that has a .git file in it, and then we can use that to grab the information we need to populate the label.
Cool. So I'll add an action item for myself to just basically create this issue, because I feel like, again, we don't have one single issue to point to say that this should be implemented. And I'll try to clarify as much as I can there.
Kids, we feel good on that one.
I was going to say, just as a quick follow up to the remote source fetcher, it doesn't seem like anybody's opposed to Pack doing such a thing, right? But we'd want to probably, again, think about some of the limitations there. So I'll create an issue for that. That may require an RFC based on conversations there as well.
Okay, on to the next item. GitHub.
Yeah, that was also put by me. So I was trying to see if I could get a private Buildpack registry up and running. And I was trying to use Pack register for it, but I noticed a couple of issues. One, it seems like it currently relies on GitHub Actions primarily to do some management around like from Pack calling register to actually like creating the right structure in the registry. And I tried so apparently the two modes, there's a GitHub mode and a Git mode. I tried the Git mode, but I couldn't get it to work properly. I don't know if I did something incorrectly, but in general, like, are there any plans for like some GitHub agnostic way of managing a Buildpack registry, which does not rely on GitHub Actions, but like a make file or some common binary that you can just run?
Yeah, no plans. It's certainly possible. Our expectation was that for private registries, you would use that Git path, but I don't think we're really exercising it much. So it's possible you just ran into a bug or something. So if you go and if you can share that like in distribution channel, we'll take a look and figure out whether it's, I mean, it could be something that we haven't documented well. It could be a bug. We're just not, I just don't think we're exercising it enough, but that path is what we intended to be the sort of recommended private registry approach. But yeah, for setting up the GitHub path, it's totally possible. And like, we actually have a private staging registry that we will eventually use to test things. It's kind of a pain to set up and like get everything working. But so I do know it's possible to like copy that pattern to another repo. It's just a lot to it. The other thing with the Git approach is that you don't need to manage namespaces. So you can just, when you're doing the Git thing, you can, if it's a private registry, you don't have to worry about like someone else registering a namespace. So you can just totally bypass that part of it.
I think at one point we talked about having like a real HTTP API, but it's wasn't the fastest thing
like
to do and support requirements, and we probably won't get to it soon. Go ahead, Joe.
And we just didn't want to operate it ourselves. Yeah, that's really, it's not that it wasn't a good idea or anything. It's just, we didn't want to run that ourselves. So we didn't prioritize building it.
Cool. I'll follow up on the distribution channel with the steps then I tried out. Cool.
Sweet. Wish you luck with that. Next one, if y'all are feeling good, RFC 148. I believe that's by you, Sam. Maybe you wanted to share your screen.
I actually I put it up there, but it is Sam's RFC. I think it's probably that one and the one below it have come up in some past working group meetings too. I put them on the list yesterday. I just figured we have most of the core team folks here, and if no one has other things to chat about, I think Emily and I had some ideas about those too. Hopefully we can try to get those pushed forward also. Sam, if that's okay.
Yeah.
You're opening so many great things. It's hard for everybody to keep up. I just wanted to make sure that we don't leave you hanging. So the 148 is about default command arguments, and Emily and I talked about. I think it would be good to make the specific change, right? Commands have multiple, things. Args have multiple things. But if we do that, like, it's going to introduce some complexity with the script mode, where like we don't want command to be just a string that's a script. Also, in some contexts, that feels very weird. And talking to Emily for a bit, we had an idea of what if we just drop everything but command and args. Just keep it really simple. Drop the ability to use a shell like implicitly. If you want to use a shell, --c something, right? And just have command and args as the two parameters. Get rid of the eval of each of the arguments by the shell, and get rid of profile also.
That was our heretical idea.
Right. Because we have execd now. And profile could still be implemented as a build pack, because execd would let you implement profile if we did want to bring that back. And that way we completely break our dependency on a shell. But with execd, we have all the same functionality we had before. It's very heretical. It would be a major breaking change, but because we can still implement profile through the build pack interface via execd, it may not be that bad. It may not take away too much functionality from users. And so, want to throw that out there as how crazy would that be as a pre 1.0 breaking change?
Wait. Did I misunderstand this? Or you're saying not supporting profile at all, or just for direct?
Not supporting profile at all, but you could still implement profile as a build pack through execd.
You could just have a profile build pack that reads the profiles and makes them into execds.
Nope. I'm gonna go with that one. I'd be okay if you were talking about for like just for direct or something like that, maybe, because you want to get away from the shell, right?
We think the whole thing is simpler if there's no distinction between direct and indirect.
For who?
It's just
for who? For you.
Buildpack authors.
For us as developers.
Authors.
Buildpack authors. Having
people trying to understand the output of their build pack as well.
We're not talking about dot profile in the app directory. That's still totally implementable through a build pack, right? Just like we have the procfile build pack, right? It'd be a dot profile build pack.
Oh, you're talking about profile in the layer directory.
Right. Profile in the layer directory.
Maybe I misunderstood.
Build pack.
But also, profile in the app would require a build pack to support it. It wouldn't be supported by the lifecycle.
We'd modularize that into a profile build pack, just like we have a procfile build pack.
Is there a concept of like built-in build packs if we want to modularize this stuff, like build packs that just come out of the bundle that lifecycle execute?
That I would much prefer to do that than to keep the dependency on a shell as part of the core API. I think just like thinking about the whole thing more, it's direct is very weird, right? Like build packs can all contribute profile scripts, but only some stacks have shells, right? When a build pack contributes a profile script and the final process says direct false, none of the profile scripts run. So we already have this weird expectation that build pack authors should write all their build packs with the idea that none of their profile scripts may run anyways. And that feels very scary. That feels like we messed something up with direct. It already causes problems with some apps that fail to build because the main build pack is a direct true with a Go binary, and then some other build pack tries to change the launch process, and they're
That's even worse for the
profile doesn't
user
run.
who's like, I pushed my profile, why isn't it running?
But
And it's
shouldn't
because the
that
build
depend-
pack changed to a direct process, right?
Oh, okay. But as for the dependency on the shell, shouldn't like the build pack says that it's compatible with these stacks, and it should know that the stack has a shell or not. Right.
That's true, but if another build pack says direct equals true, it doesn't matter if the stack has a shell. It's still going to not run its profile scripts. If the build pack that sets the start command says direct equals true, it won't run. But yes, I misspoke. I shouldn't have said that the build pack would never be able to know if the stack has a shell, because it can look at the current stack ID environment variable, and it knows what stack IDs it's compatible with. Although we do have some build packs that are compatible with any stack, and it's kind of a problem for them. Like you can say stack ID equals star, and then those build packs, if they use profile, kind of assume they have bash 4 specifically, which is weird. But that's kind of an edge case. I agree.
So I don't really care what the mechanism is. Like I really like the idea of like built-in build packs to add like modular behavior. Like I can actually think of a lot of cases, inline build pack or something like that, where we could use that. But it being a default behavior and being built in is what's important to me. And it's important, like having shell and shell things is, I think, important for the majority of our users, right? Like these, like the shellless or direct is really, I think, targeting, the Go developer and that type of persona that we focused on. But there's a lot of places where we're missing on the broader community, Ruby developers and JavaScript developers who expect and would want those things. So like, I'm totally in favor of making sure we have like the primitives that support I don't know how to characterize it other than Go developers, but you know what I mean? And then also still have the defaults that, yeah.
Like right now, Spring native apps run with no shell by default, and you'd like to do that for all of Java apps, which is like, at least on our end, 70% of people.
Right, no, I mean, it's not Go developers, but it is more of a power user or something like that, right? And that totally makes sense. But the average person who's building a build pack is going to want a shell and is going to want, profile dir or whatever.
I don't know if I
like every build pack I've created uses it.
You're not the average, maybe the average build pack author, if you're talking about number of build packs, but I'm not so sure it's the average build pack user. I think the average build pack end user, most of them are Java developers and they want a smaller image and don't care about a shell.
Java, Go, and .NET Core are all examples of languages that there's no good reason to have bash 4 in the runtime container, when the app is running in the end. And those are like major language ecosystems. But I'm not saying we shouldn't have profile.
Not in every use case. There are plenty of Java developers who want a shell. I believe that it's not across the board. And I'm not saying that. And I am thinking about the author persona. I'm not thinking like users should, for the most part, not care. Although, like being able to drop a .profile in your app is pretty darn useful.
I definitely think we should support that. I just think it should be something that I don't think it should be an assumption that the API makes, especially that it's bash 4 specifically, that it's like so tied to a very particular shell, right, in the spec that like it seems like that functionality could be very pervasive, but modular and disableable if you really didn't want to use it, right? If you have a stack that doesn't have a shell in it, so it's not going to do anything anyways.
I think it's fine for a build pack to have a dependency on a shell, because a build pack says what stack it's dependent on and knows characteristics of that stack. Right now, our lifecycle has a dependency on bash, and it's not smart enough to know when it's on a stack where there's actually bash or not. And there's bash specific logic at the lifecycle, and that feels wrong.
Most of the containers we're building, .profile doesn't work in them on our side because they don't have a shell in that, final container for kind of the recommended way that we want people to build Java apps. So I don't think that goal of .profile works everywhere is achievable, because it's never going to work in a case where your stack run image doesn't have a shell in it. but it could be like a very central piece of it could be a very central piece of built-in functionality through the Buildpack interface on a lot of platforms that do have shells, but we're not going to be able to support it unilaterally because we'll never have a guarantee that there's a shell in the run image.
I guess the only other parallel I have to compare this with is Docker, and Docker also comes with both forms of entry points. It comes with like a shell entry point, and it comes with a normal like direct entry point. And I guess the assumptions we're making here also hold true for Docker, where you could have a scratch image which doesn't have a shell, and it still tries to execute bin/sh-c. But I guess like I'm just curious, like if you have a build pack that's trying to use Profile D on a stack that doesn't have a shell, then shouldn't build pack be modified to like not support that stack?
I think yes, the build pack can look at the stack ID, and unless it's like one of the special any stack build packs, it should totally be able to tell the stack ID is a stack ID that doesn't have a shell at runtime, and you need to do something else for Profile D. The case that's worse is when that build pack doesn't contribute the main process type. Another build pack contributes the main process type, and that build pack sets direct equals true, because then the build pack that earlier build packs that contributed Profile D scripts don't know that their Profile D is not going to run at launch right now.
That can happen even when there is a shell. If someone wants a faster startup, so they pick a direct process.
That'd be another build pack that's being used in the process, not the app developer. Sorry.
But isn't that a separate issue from removing Profile D entirely? Like that seems like having direct equals true, not launching Profile D is the issue, not the fact that Profile D itself exists.
As soon as
complexity, right? Like as soon as execd landed, there were like a couple of cases where we needed it in some of these distroless images for, native images for Java. But at the same time, we just moved everything under the sun to execd, because then you never have to worry about what's running when and what the compatibility is. It's just simpler. And now that we have a mechanism that works in all cases, should we be encouraging people to use that? Or if it's hard in some ways, creating scaffolding so it's easy?
If you have a function service and you're using build packs that need to start, or that you want to build images that need to start very quickly, having a shell run at launch is expensive also. And so that ability to do a build on any stack that doesn't run a shell at launch is useful in a lot of contexts too.
Sorry, I just want to be clear. Was I hearing a consensus around this one, or?
Oh, I don't think so.
Are you
Steve and I
are you writing an RFC? Are the two of you going to put together an RFC for this to supersede this one? Is that your proposal?
Well, I think it's more like this one mixed with the current profile mechanism with command, where command can be something that's not a list, is really hard to, we'd have to resolve a lot of things to get this into the current API, but it'd be very simple. This could almost go in verbatim minus, be taking out some things in the examples if we, could get consensus on getting rid of implementing profile through execd and taking the shell related stuff out of the API, then this would just make perfect sense, right? And so there could be two RSCs and that one goes first. We could decide that this idea is too crazy, and Joe could say never going to happen, and we could figure out how to resolve those conflicts in here. But I just wanted to kind of very directly present that idea and see how bad it would be, if that makes sense.
We didn't mean to sort of like huddle up and then drop a bunch of information verbally without following up with writing stuff down. The main reason we synced up on this stuff is because we felt like we were derailing working group by arguing with each other, and we should get on the same page, and then we can come back and capture it in words when we have more time.
So are you on the same page then with Steven's idea? Is that?
Yeah.
If it weren't for XID being able to run, keep that dot profile compatibility in the app directory at launch, I would have a lot bigger concerns about it. But because we can totally implement that still, right? That's what sold me on it at the end. That we brought in XID and that gives that same functionality, but it makes the shell optional.
In some ways, I feel like it's like proc file, and then it's not actually a part of Cloud Native Buildpacks at all. But because people are used to it being around, it feels like it is. And dot profile support could be like that.
Right. I'm really.
Go ahead, Anthony.
Nah, please, you go for it.
I do feel like the lack of, not that we need procfile, but the lack of users' ability to specify process types is still a big gap in Buildpacks today. I think that's a thing people want to do.
Are there maybe iterations that can be done where a smaller subset of changes, like the ones proposed here, could then be followed up by a maybe riskier, contentious change through a different RFC?
Problem is, like, I love the core idea here, but thinking about how to handle scripts in this gets very weird very fast. So I don't know if we can take this core idea without already making changes to the script functionality anyways. Right?
It's like we could take this and try to solve a lot of hard problems, but if we can agree on a longer term, direction, or like the kind of different larger picture that's more simple, then we get to bypass all that hard work.
And concretely, the way it gets weird is right now, if someone wants their process to basically be a bash script, the type of the command key is a string. So they just put the script in the string and it kind of makes sense. But if command was an array of strings, writing a script in an array of strings where you're not prefixing it with bash is weird. Especially because I don't think we want to support two types for the same key in our schema, which is what sort of like Docker entry point is like, where it can be an array or a string. I think doing that in a TOML file is weird. So we would then need like a new key or something for scripts in order to make this work. But if we're going to introduce a new key, maybe we should talk about other solutions.
Okay. I guess to Javier's point, maybe Anthony was also pushing for this. What are next steps to help try to move this forward?
I guess I'm interested in knowing if it's dead on arrival or not. Like, should I be writing feedback for how we add the script key, or would you be interested in the proposal for removing the shell entirely?
Doesn't mean you'd accept the proposal as we've described it. Just like, does that idea
like if there's
seem
no chance, then as a person who's spent a lot of time thinking about how to manage my time, I probably wouldn't spend a lot of time writing up a proposal that I know for a fact nobody wants.
I'm not sure how to answer that. I think like I understand the goal of the spec not having, or like being shell aware or whatever. And if you can rectify that with the default still being that I can, like, that it's not a backward breaking thing, or not a, or yeah, it doesn't break like existing build packs, for example, then yeah, that's definitely something I'm open to. But I'm definitely like, yeah, those are the.
Yeah, I think it'll be hard to not break existing build packs, but maybe what you're saying, Joe, is like the functionality will still be there in some way, shape, or form. It seems like it's
yeah,
a
that might
pretty
be a
big
little
API
looser than
change.
yeah.
Any change
The functionality
breaks.
being there might not be sufficient. Like it needs to be seamless.
Do you care about individual build packs being able to contribute profile descripts and not exec descripts?
Do I? Yeah, well, I mean, like I think probably literally every build pack I've written contributes profile descript. So I'd have to look at them and see. I mean, like ngrok starts an ngrok in the background and sets up the config because it can't read environment variables. And it does that, you know, at boot. They have the web TTY one, which does a lot. That's probably the one I'd want to look at the most. And granted, like these are not widely used, right? I'm probably literally the only person using them, but I don't think that's the point, right? Like if we want to grow that ecosystem and we want to make this accessible, that's the kind of things people are gonna want to be able to do.
It's pretty easy to convert because you can just env at the end. Like a profile descript can pretty easily output its environment afterwards and be converted to XXD. And we have broken the Buildpack API, you know, a couple times with the API version bump and migration instructions. Recently, it seems like that hasn't been as much of a problem when we started API versioning. And so that like before 1.0, you know, if we're going to do it, that'd be the time to have
yeah, I mean, it hasn't been a big deal. Like, I mean, we do get people internally at Roku like bump into stuff and they get really confused every time there's like something breaking between API versions. Like it just came up yesterday. And so I don't think it always surfaces in a way that we would see it. But to your point, I don't think like the broader community outside of like Salesforce and VMware are running into them.
I guess to answer your question, at least for me, Emily, it is not dead on arrival.
But it sounds like it would be nice to have some maybe migration instructions so that there's an idea of how you would achieve the same thing, you know, in this new world, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, like I
Sounds
think
like we're interested in the fully fleshed out proposal.
Yeah, like I think it's interesting probably to have some thought, whether it's in the RFC proposal or not, or some discussion around like what does supporting, I guess, the shell stuff look like, and what is the cost or whatever, like for these people who want to do that, or if I'm a new user who doesn't have an existing build pack, right? Like, because that's, I think, a thing that's supported pretty well, coming from Dockerfile as well, as right, like they do support both of these things, and so what does that equivalent look like in our world? I think is the piece that I'm interested in. If that makes sense. But I'm all for cleaner API and all that, and making that, you know.
I think this is funny because I feel like I'm always on team copy Docker conventions, and you guys are always telling me that Docker conventions are terrible, but I would say that the two forms of entry point are one of the Docker conventions that I really don't like at all.
I don't know if I like the convention. I just think it's the like, this is probably the world of where people are coming from. Doesn't mean I have to like it. But I think that's the community and world we live in. So if we can find a better way to kind of support that, I think that would be a huge win for us.
An iterative thing we could do, at least if we can't get rid of the shell completely, is have the stack define the shell instead of having the spec define that it's bash 4. Then
I worry about
stack ID.
Yeah, I worry about that making, like, I feel like we're already kind of failing at Buildpacks working across stacks, or like even implementations of Bionic. Like just some of the questions, like with the registry of like, oh, I want more information on the stack and the builder, makes me feel like we're not doing a great job there. And if we start to have like, oh, the stack has a different shell from that stack, or this one doesn't and this one does for the shell, like, I don't know, maybe not.
Sorry.
No, yeah, I guess you're not saying like, you're not saying different implementations of the Bionic, you're saying like totally different stacks, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay, yeah, that's
different stack ID can have different shell. Although I think there is a risk there too, or like, I know Emily wants to move in the direction of pushing configuration out of the stack ID. So it could be configurable in a different way per build pack, something like that. But it seems like this is all part of that big, what do we do about profile and shells and that kind of early design decision before 1.0.
I mean, if we did it at the stack, the whole default build pack thing could maybe be a stack pack. Like, or maybe not a stack pack, but provided by the stack, and it's still the same kind of modular thing.
That's interesting. Seems like not dead on arrival, but this would not be a quick RFC to get through, if that makes sense. Definitely need a lot of consideration for what we're going to do.
I think that's true of any of these like spec breaking RFCs though.
Yeah, that makes sense. This one felt especially like, felt like I should be very direct about it because it's such a, could break a lot of build packs,
no
right?
Pun intended.
Changes major functionality, sorry.
No pun intended, being direct.
We're gonna be direct about all the processes.
That's pretty good. So the next one I put up there, 145, just touch on really quickly, is also what Emily and I talked about, would also be a large breaking change, but maybe not as controversial as this. So what if we moved all of the arguments to build, bin build, bin detect, all of that into environment variables, and then introduced a new configure to put the configuration. So move, argv1 to layers dir, right, all caps in an environment variable, and then introduce a new configure, and that's where that goes. And then we can keep passing the arguments for time immortal until so it wouldn't actually be breaking, and then remove them in some future date. We talked about that a couple times in the past. It seems like no matter what we do here, we're kind of running into that same like.
Yeah, can you pause right there? I want to see the, like, down a little bit. I want to see the current, and then no, up. I want to see both the formatted parts. Yeah.
This is the original proposal, but instead of moving into the layers dir, what if we just get rid of the args completely?
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And add a new one. I'm worried about making the paths really long. Like already layers and the build pack ID and the layer name is already kind of a lot.
So you're saying, so you're not, yeah, you're saying not this, you're saying two separate directories, one for the launch, build, and store, and another for the layers that are not parent-child or must not be parent-child?
Well, we move to environment variables and then doesn't matter. They're whatever, we're
Have to be
past
on a
environment
volume though,
variables.
so it still gets to the exporter, but which means it probably goes in the layer stir from the platform perspective. But just we can make the paths for those ones long because they don't actually get exported. It's fine. And then maybe someday we
And
know the
then-
name
and
of
then-
layer stir, but we don't need to do that today.
And then you're saying no, that would also be getting away from the positional arguments and doing the environment variables to find these. Yeah. We've talked about that a bunch, even independent.
The only other reason I moved that Buildpack workspace to a top level concept and layers to a subdirectory underneath it was that there was this other conversation that came up around things you may want to configure which don't necessarily relate to a specific layer. So like we were talking about process specific environment variables, and the only way to specify them right now is like create a layer and then create the end directory inside it. So that was the other thing. Like if there are other Buildpack level like configurations, I guess not just files, but other folders that may exist, or like where would that go in this?
Configure, I think, next to launch toml, build toml, and store toml. It'd be like metadata, general Buildpack stuff that the Buildpack is writing during launch, and configure, and layers dir is, where layers go.
This one I'm less opinionated about. I do agree that the path names are long. I feel like we could solve that in the Buildpack workspace thing by just naming it L instead of layers. And then also you could set 2 environment variables as well for both if you wanted to use that instead. But I guess that's hacky. So 2 directories also works.
I would be hesitant to change to something that we're not very happy with, because it's like kind of all, doesn't make a huge difference, doesn't make any difference in the functionality of the API. And if we're going to make a breaking change, we should at least make a breaking change that everybody thinks, yes, this is the right interface for it, before we do the 1.0 thing.
The one thing I like about that breakdown between a configure and a layers dir is that then it makes it clear that the layers dir would actually be exported, and like these are the layers, whereas the configure can be ephemeral and none of that would be exported, which I think right now is like you have to read the spec to know that, okay, these are not going to be exported in the same output path. That would also, I guess, be useful.
I agree with that. But going off that, I think that means process specific environment variables, if you didn't want to tie them to a layer, would still go in the layer stir because that's exported. And
I am sorry that we didn't give this one as much time, young Samuel, but hopefully we can bring it up again, right?
Yeah, we should definitely pick this up in the next working group.
All right, y'all good? I've never seen them so excited, Samuel. Yo, keep bringing these RFCs. All right, peace out, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.